She gave birth to triplets, but got the shock of her life when doctor noticed this detail. A normal pregnancy can already be one of the most difficult experiences in any woman's life. But giving birth to triplets takes this to a whole new level, especially when someone is facing this without the father of her baby. But everybody expects that after the birth it will all be fine, but not for Cythia. Before she has even seen her babies, the doctor already has some worrying news for her. But what does the doctor have to tell Cynthia? Is something wrong with the babies? Why is the father not there? And what effect will this news have on their relationship? This is the moment Cynthia has been anticipating for 9 months, the birth of her triplets. She knows the pain will be unimaginable, but when it's over, her life will never be the same. She is rushed into the delivery room where the process finally begins. It takes about 4 hours, but then all 3 children are finally born. They are taken away for a checkup before Cynthia can even lay her eyes on them. Then the doctor comes in, and by the look in his eyes, Cynthia can tell that something is not right. "I don't know how to tell you this," the doctor says. Cynthia feels the color drain from her face. How is this possible? But the doctor was sure about his assessment the moment he laid eyes on her babies' faces. But to better understand what is wrong, a bit of backstory is required. Cynthia and Johnny Carlton were the town's dream couple. They had been together since high school, dated through college, and later got married. Their relationship had spanned 10 years and their marriage 5. Everyone thought of them as perfect for each other, and no one more than Naomi. Naomi was Cynthia and Johnny's 3-year-old daughter. She looked a lot like her mom, with dark brown hair and brown eyes. Naomi had recently started kindergarten and loved to play with her friends. Although many of her friends wanted toys and dresses, Naomi had different aspirations. She wanted one thing more than anything else. Naomi wanted more than anything else to have a younger sibling, a dream that she had made known to everyone who would listen to her. She often played pretend with her dolls and talked about holding babies. Both Cynthia and Johnny had considered having another baby, but they just weren't certain it was the right time. Having Naomi was a blessing for the young parents who loved to spend time with the gleeful 3-year-old. They enjoyed her company and loved her deeply. However, having another child seemed like a whole different matter. They were young and dealing with a shaky economy. It didn't seem financially wise. However, with the success of Naomi, the young couple decided it would not be a bad thing to have another baby. And instead of worrying about the future, they decided it would be best to let fate run its course. If the child was born, then they would certainly love it very much. While they had decided to let fate happen, they were still not actively hoping to conceive. They still had their hesitations. Instead, they compromised and Cynthia went off her birth control. They knew it would take a few months for her cycle to start and decided to let the months be their decision period. Months went by and the couple seemed to be in the clear. Cynthia showed no signs of expecting and felt a wave of relief because of it. Although this time her worries had nothing to do with the couple's finances, and instead with an issue she had long been avoiding. Cynthia had reservations about her future with Johnny. She felt their marriage wasn't as stable as she had hoped it would be and could sense that she was no longer in love with her husband. She struggled to keep these worries at bay, but it wasn't easy, especially with recent developments. Cynthia seemed to have many suitors who admired her at her work and around town. It seemed they were all able to bring the spark she no longer felt for her husband. However, she felt very guilty. She knew Johnny didn't share those reservations about their relationship, but she couldn't fight the feeling. But things were about to get more complicated. One morning, Cynthia woke up feeling nauseous. Her body ached and she felt weak in her knees. She stumbled to the bathroom and found herself turned over on the toilet. Johnny was out on the construction site and would not be back for hours. Seeing no other option, she called a taxi and headed for the local clinic. Cynthia was assisted in seeing the doctor. She explained her symptoms and responded to the questions the doctor asked about her routine that week. After a few questions, the doctor had some shocking news for Cynthia. He asked her to lay down and ran his final test. Cynthia sat on the chair and frowned. She had a feeling she knew what the doctor was about to say, but she held on to the hope that it wasn't true. Finally, the doctor returned and offered a shocking revelation. "You're pregnant." Cynthia stared blankly at the doctor, not quite believing her ears, but there was more news. Not only was Cynthia pregnant, she would be expecting a little more than a bundle of joy. Cynthia was expecting not 1, not 2, but 3 babies. She would be having triplets. The shock was too much for Cynthia to handle. The doctor explained that she was likely about a month and a half into her pregnancy. What could she do? In the weeks leading up to the news, Cynthia had become more and more convinced that leaving Johnny was the right thing to do. Not only was she over their relationship, it had become a sore spot for her, and she could not believe that he couldn't see how unhappy she was. But now, with 3 babies on the way, Cynthia felt stuck. Cynthia wrapped up at the doctor's office and made her way back home. her thoughts were filled with the shocking news she had just received. How would she share the news with Johnny? What could she possibly say? Would this signal a new start for them, or was there no hope? By the time she got home, her head felt a little more clear, and Cynthia knew what she had to do. She would tell Johnny the truth. Cynthia decided that she would come clean about everything, her unhappiness, the triplets, and see how she felt. After pacing the floor, she waited for Johnny to get home. Johnny got home a few hours later, and Cynthia sat him down to talk about things. Cynthia shared the news of the triplets, which got Johnny excited, but then she shared how she truly felt. Johnny was shocked and hurt. The dreams he had had of their family growing seemed to be falling apart. He begged Cynthia to reconsider, to try and fix their marriage. Although he had made some mistakes, he was certain they could fix the marriage so long as they still trusted each other. But then Cynthia reveals the final thing to Johnny, that she had kept hidden. The secret was far too troubling for Johnny to handle. Cynthia confessed that she had actually been seeing someone else on the side for a few months. She was embarrassed about her behavior, but she felt sharing this fact would help Johnny see that their marriage was over and help him move on. Johnny couldn't believe his ears. Johnny was furious. How could Cynthia do this to their family? Hearing the news made him feel hopeless, and he chose to give Cynthia the divorce she wanted. However, they both wanted custody over Naomi and her unborn siblings. The custody battle was long and ugly, but eventually the judge made his decision. The court granted Cynthia custody over Naomi. The deciding factor was that Naomi stated she preferred to stay with Cynthia. However, the judge stated that it was too soon to make any rulings on the case of the triplets. Instead, Cynthia and Johnny were both to return after the babies were born. Cynthia was satisfied with the result of getting Naomi, but she was still scared. Johnny was throwing a fit over the fact that Naomi preferred to stay with Cynthia rather than him. He began making other requests. Cynthia's lawyer informed her that there was a good chance she would not get custody over her triplets. There were several reasons why Cynthia may not get full custody over all three triplets. The main sticking point for this was her financial situation. The judge ruled it to be sufficient for taking care of Naomi, but not necessarily for taking care of 4 children, which Cynthia would have once the triplets were born. It would need to improve over the next couple of months. On the contrary, however, Johnny was able to provide the financial stability the triplets would need. When partial custody and child support were discussed, he fought the notion that he might need to pay Cynthia child support. He was already fighting child support for Naomi and demanded that not only should the triplets go to him, but Cynthia pay him child support for them. Meanwhile, Cynthia's new boyfriend Eric wasn't able to financially support her family either, as he could barely support himself. The logical part of Cynthia questioned why she cheated on Johnny with him in the first place. Cynthia felt stuck, and on top of that, being pregnant with triplets was not easy. A lot of days Cynthia just felt too weak to really undertake anything. She did the best she could, but the pregnancy was taking a toll on her body. She ended up spending most of her time at home with her boyfriend Eric. Taking care of her Naomi helped too, which was way more than a child of Naomi's age should have needed to do. Months passed and the situation didn't improve at all. Cynthia was able to manage her current flow of money, but had no way to improve her financial situation. Eric stepped up and started trying really hard, but he was still falling short. The two of them were understandably worried for their futures. At the same time, Johnny was ensuring more and more that he would get custody when the triplets were born. He got a promotion with better pay and was thus able to afford a nicer house. Additionally, he got into a new relationship with a woman who was dying to be a mother. He was counting on those triplets coming to him. Naomi began spending the weekends with her father. She enjoyed her time with him and his new girlfriend. Cynthia felt guilty that she was not able to provide more for Naomi. She was glad Naomi was able to maintain a relationship with her father, but their improving bond still hurt her. She grew more worried for what would happen when the triplets came. The date of the birth was approaching rapidly. Eric took Cynthia to the hospital preemptively because preparing for triplets takes a lot more precaution compared to a normal pregnancy. Naomi was sent to stay with Johnny until the time of the birth. Cynthia hoped Johnny would not try something crazy. When the labor started, Eric was by her side. Johnny also showed up with Naomi but did not leave. Cynthia felt that she couldn't deny him the right to be there because he very well could be the father. The whole process was shaking up to be very awkward, which made Cynthia more distressed, which put more strain on the birth. The birth was fairly difficult, as one could of course expect with triplets. It took 7 hours for the whole process. Cynthia was exhausted afterwards. Eric and Johnny were both waiting to see the babies with anticipation. The doctor was aware that there was a paternity dispute and thus knew what he had to do. Cynthia didn't get the chance to hold her children after they were born because they were immediately taken into another room for basic testing. Plus, it wasn't like she was able to hold the first or the second while she was still in the process of giving birth. Nevertheless, the situation was just a little bit heartbreaking for her. By the end, Cynthia was absolutely exhausted. She was not out of the woods yet because there were still problems to solve. She couldn't even think about the prospect of losing her babies to Johnny. Thankfully, Johnny kept a respectful distance. Cynthia tried her best to hold back tears from all the scared emotions she was having. After Cynthia regained some of her strength, she asked the doctor if she could now see and hold her babies. Johnny began to protest, but a nurse told him to be quiet. She was definitely the mother, even if the status of the father had yet to be determined. However, the doctor had an unexpected message for her. At first, the doctor told Cynthia that he didn't have a lot of information. What he did know was that the babies were undergoing some extra tests. Cynthia immediately got concerned and began asking a lot of questions about her babies. Were they okay? Why wasn't she able to see them? Her heart rate increased and the monitors began beeping. The doctor immediately tried to calm Cynthia down by telling her it was nothing life-threatening, but she had to wait a little longer. Truth be told, the doctor was stalling until the results of the paternity tests came and he had noticed something about the babies and wanted to be sure about it. Despite the calming words of the doctor, Cynthia was still extremely scared. What could the problems be? She was afraid for the health of her babies. She was also afraid that Johnny might have done something and was ensuring that the babies would be doing tests until she fell asleep so he could steal them out from under her. However, Johnny was also getting tired of waiting and took Naomi to the waiting room so that he didn't have to listen to the doctor's drivel on anymore. Cynthia became concerned for Naomi and sent Eric after them just in case. She hoped that Johnny wasn't getting any ideas about grabbing the triplets and running. Cynthia's concerns built up and up until the doctor came in the room again. He and some nurses were bringing the babies in one by one. The nurses helped place the babies around Cynthia and she was just so happy, but then the doctor asked where Johnny was, but he didn't want to say why. The doctor left to track down Johnny an hour ago. This would have raised a lot of questions with Cynthia, but she was too concerned with the 3 babies in her arms. She didn't want to think about how these might be the only moments she got to spend with them. Instead, she resolved not to lose them to Johnny. An hour later, the doctor walked back into the room with Johnny close behind him. The surprising thing was that tears were streaming down Johnny's face. He wouldn't even look at Cynthia and the baby. Cynthia was very confused and held her triplets tighter. The doctor then began explaining everything that was going on. During the labor, one of the nurses had been studying Johnny and Eric both then while doing all the basic tests for hearing and sight. Before the paternity tests were even started, she noticed that the babies did not seem to look like Johnny at all. If she had to guess, she would say they looked more like Eric. But as they had already agreed to do paternity tests, all they needed to do was submit DNA from the triplets from Johnny and from Eric. Because paternity tests are tricky things, it took a while and thus everyone needed to stall. As the tests began coming back, they quickly discovered that the DNA of the triplets did not match Johnny. So then they needed to wait on the paternity tests to come back from Eric. This is when they brought the babies to see Cynthia since they had gotten everything they needed from the children. The doctor went to find Johnny to tell him the bad news. As the tests came back for Eric, they found that he did match the DNA of the triplets. So as it turned out, during their affair, Eric had gotten Cynthia pregnant as opposed to Johnny. Tears started to well up in Cynthia's eyes. She could not believe it. This would mean Johnny didn't have a case for the triplets and she wouldn't lose the custody of them to him. She would still have to fight for Naomi, of course, but Naomi had already said what she wanted. Upon hearing that he was not the father, Johnny immediately left the hospital, leaving Naomi with Eric and Cynthia as well. He called his lawyer and told him to drop the case entirely. He knew he would lose. Besides, he was not going to take care of children that were not even his. If he wanted kids, he would have to have them with his new girlfriend. Eric came back to the room and hugged Cynthia close. He kissed all of his biological children. As far as Cynthia was concerned, this was a best-case scenario that she hadn't dared think possible. Johnny had made everything so terrible. Assuming that the triplets were his, she hadn't spent much time considering that they might not be. Naomi was glad to have siblings too. Over the next couple of months, things improved for everybody. Eric got a better job and started making more money. Cynthia didn't have to worry about custody anymore, and Johnny began paying appropriate child support for Naomi. Johnny and Cynthia's relationship was able to improve as they co-parented responsibly.